Hello. The mic is sick of me talking, so you all are probably too. I apologize for the delay. This next presentation I'm really excited about. Before we get started on it, though, I do just want to give a shout out that if you hear game sounds from the ice, it's the 4th annual Girls Hockey Clinic happening here. It's being led by U.S. Olympians Kelly Stack and Lisa Chesson, and I just think that's really cool, so I want you all to know that that's happening. All right. Next up, this is going to be awesome because I think that we really don't do enough justice to goaltending in the analytics world. That's my opinion. Cole Anderson is going to speak to us about a spatio-temporal analysis of goaltender positioning and strategies in professional hockey. Cole is a former collegiate goaltender, played the game, turned economist, turned data scientist. He's worked in so many fields and industries, and currently he is on the machine learning team at LogMeIn. He's responsible for identifying and applying opportunities for data marketing and business operations. He's also a consultant for the data analytics team at SportLogic, focusing on hockey research. He earned a degree in economics from Amherst College and currently lives in Boston with his fiancee, Nikki, points for shouting out Nikki, and has a dog named Kretchy. In his free time, he enjoys the outdoors and thinking about sports, establishing crowdscoutsports.com in 2015. Please help me welcome Cole.
Thank you. First off, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to Allison, everybody here at Columbus. And obviously, traveling was no easy feat, so everybody that made it today. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Nick on the slide here, Slick Nick 94. You can find him on Twitter for helping me out here. And especially any complaints you guys have, definitely direct towards him. Anything you want to like praise or that sort of thing, slide my way. But so quick agenda. As Allison mentioned, this is goaltending, positioning, and strategy. So we'll take a look at kind of what goaltending, like the positioning, how it feeds in to things like attacker shot decision making and expected goals, and then the strategy for goaltenders themselves. So there's kind of 3 broad categories we'll go over fairly quickly, and then there's some model applications as well. We'll create these models. I'll spend most of the time talking about the models, and then kind of tease some of the applications, and a lot of it is in the appendix if you want to check that out. So to start, there's a lot of talk about pre-shot movement and data circles, offensive, like tactical circles, kind of that's where those things meet. Why do we care about pre-shot movement? Obviously, is to get the goalie moving. Given some, definition of pre-shot movement, it does actually, just to kind of tease, what distance to optimal angle we'll get into later, but it does get the goalie moving off angle when you're able to generate pre-shot movement. So as far as like goaltender positioning, I wanted to kind of go into the kind of the trade-off that exists. Goaltenders, there's not a ton in their control, but they are able to make some like strategic decisions about how they play with their depth and stuff like that, how they're able to approach kind of offensive attacks coming. And then that kind of feeds into like the process, right? Goaltender results are obviously they're very frustrating because there's a lot of noise. Think of plus minus, like that's kind of the first thing we got away from is having a goals-based measurement. Now we're able to kind of go further down the pyramid into kind of the process. You want the positioning, then the save selection, and then the results will follow. So we're able to decompose that a little bit. And then obviously expected goals models, it's a factor. And then flip that around. So, it's not just about goaltenders. It's opportunity to look at how attackers can make decisions based on where the goalie is, shot versus pass. Because all these events, shots, passes, everything we see is observational, right? So there's kind of this game within a game of like, when we see a shot, it's probably because there was a reason behind it. And so that can be either to keep the possession going or hopefully score a goal, or, just get off the ice, get a whistle. So talking about the data, this is event data and tracking data merged together. So you can see the event here is marked as the Leon Draisaitl shot right there. The tracking data would be where Jacob Markstrom is in his crease currently. And that's not just a handed down by God XY coordinate for Markstrom. it's actually kind of this frame weighting that I had to do to say, backed out on saves, minimizing the kind of delta between all these event angles and the goaltender positioning. What's the best way to like weight the frames and come up with an estimate for the goaltender positioning? And you can see in this example, he's a little off angle. It was probably a nice pass from McDavid there, and now he's got to get over. And so he has about 2 feet to cover there to get on the optimal angle. And you can kind of teasing, the further out you are, obviously, the further you have to move across the net to cover that angle. So that's kind of the trade-off that we talked about before. To kind of get to this stuff and create models, we're able to take tracking data and event data and kind of create this, situational snapshot. So things that I would be looking for when trying to predict or trying to explain goaltender positioning or, the probability of a goal would be things like, passing lanes open. And these are things that, in addition to, classic event data, passing lanes that are open to the shooter. Okay, so if there's passing lanes, maybe weak side threat, maybe the goalie's going to like back off a little bit, play the pass a little bit more. You can imagine, this is an example of a 4-on-3 power play, right? Most power plays, goalies are playing a little deeper just to manage that risk reward about, facing the shot versus a cross-ice pass. And so these are features that we can generate to feed into kind of each of the models. First model being the goaltender positioning model. 2 components to it, right? The depth from the goal line. This is fairly easy this is relatively easy to explain with a model, relative being to the distance from optimal. So you can imagine that, Leon Draisaitl shot, okay, and how far do you vary left or right based on, was there a cross-ice pass? Are you facing some sort of screen, that sort of thing? Nobody wants to be off angle, so there's a little bit more noise there, a little tougher to predict. But these are the 2 kind of components we're trying to explain. With those expected values, we can measure each goalie versus their expected. So, maybe you're on a team that always, you're on the PK a lot or something like that. Well, we can adjust for that, and we can index against your expected for each. And so it's just this delta, right? So somebody like Jimmy Howard, I don't know if you guys are able to see, very aggressive goaltender. Mike Smith at the very bottom, he's notoriously conservative, or very close to the goal line. That difference is about a little over a foot. So you can think of the average the average depth off the goal line is about 3 feet. So between the most aggressive and the least aggressive goaltender in the sample, it's over a foot. So that's fairly significant. And you can see as there's kind of this trade-off, the more aggressive you are, the tougher it is to maintain angle in some situations. So, and that's the trade-off, right? And that's totally intuitive and consistent with what would you expect. Going through, this is by strength. So 5-on-5 versus 5-on-4. There's actually quite strong relationship. Most goalies in the NHL are coming out with like similar strategies for each. So that is actually a little bit stronger than I would expect. But that's something that can be. We can also look at the year-over-year adjustment. This is actually a little looser than the strength correlation. Still significant, but you can see somebody like Matt Murray really backed off this year. Mackenzie Blackwood's a lot more aggressive, but for the most part, there's a little bit of moving around. One of the interesting ones, though, is Bobrovsky, obviously, moving from Columbus to Florida this year. So last year, he was more aggressive than average by a couple inches, by about 4 inches. And this year, he's fallen back to average. And just looking at the kind of the contextual factors around it, he's in a situation now where, the numbers at one times he's facing has increased, the lateral pass share has increased, and the angular velocity across on the average shot has increased. So it's just a different environment, and you can imagine how that might like knock you off where you are. Like being an aggressive goaltender, it can, maybe you kind of fade back a little bit. So it'd be interesting to kind of monitor that as the season goes on. So flipping that around and looking at the attacker decision tree. So basically, what I did is I took all passes and shots. And I threw a bunch of passes out that are like just pass back to the point, no threat of a shot, kind of like, those bumper plays where, so it's about 2/3 of the data set is shots and another third passes, and said, okay, given these contextual factors around, you have weak side threats, passing options, where the goalie is this going to be a pass or a shot? Like, should you shoot this, basically? To kind of, and we can see that the goaltender depth is this is a tree-based model. All these models are XGBoost, I should say. The first two are regressions, and these are classification problems. So goalie depth does have a significant, these are the top features out of 41. So they are playing, some of it has, and then kind of the quality of chance goes in there too, and distance to net and that sort of thing. So what we can do here is we can take all the, just kind of a delta system again at the player level, and say somebody like Brendan Gallagher is usually net front. Anytime he gets a puck, it's probably a good chance. There's probably not a lot of passing options, it's congested. He's going to shoot the puck, and he does. Then somebody like John Carlson, who, if you go through the appendix, has a very interesting offensive defensive profile. He's, high expected pass rate, but you can imagine, like, he's creating passing lanes for himself, which, where he is probably on defense, and he has good players to pass to, obviously. And what we can do with some of these deltas is, so what this is showing is saying some players shoot more than we'd expect, right? So some shooters are, shot happy, and some are more likely to pass. And so when you think about, like, if I take 100 shots and, that's maybe 7 more than normal, how does that change the denominator of the shooting percentage, my shooting percentage, if I'm more selective or less selective with shots? So I kind of did that, and I took that and applied it to, this in-sample shooting percentage, and said, given what you could, given how you could be selective or not selective with shots, how would that change your shooting percentage? So it's about plus or minus 2% that I found. So when you're thinking about, like, somebody like John Carlson or Letang or McCarr, defensemen, and you're saying, I want to regress the shooting percentage back to, defensive averages, maybe there's a wiggle room in there for about 2%, because, maybe they're more selective with shots and they're not bearing it in the goalie's chest from the blue line, right? And then the last thing is the expected goals models. So this came in 2 flavors. One was the tracking augmented expected goals, taking all those contextual tracking metrics and using that to predict goals same way. And then adding the goaltender positioning, which actually that delta distance from optimal, that Jacob Markstrom being off angle by about 2 feet, was a significant feature, which is good, because if it wasn't, then we would have trouble. But so these are kind of walking through the same thing. 1, 2 I just talked about. The next step would be to say, okay, we have, so number 3A, the observed goaltender position, Jacob Markstrom off angle, and we can, that probability of goal goes up. But we can also say, okay, what if he had hit the goaltender positioning that we expected based on the first 2 models? What if he got into the perfect position? What is the difference between that goal probability where we observed him and something that is expected or perfect? You could index to either one, right? What if you got to the perfect angle? And now we kind of have a currency to turn that positioning into a goal probability, and now you can, like, measure against goals, right? Positioning matters, and now it's in a form that we actually care about, right? And then you can also kind of do the same thing with these attack events, right? So you have a pass from you have the puck in a good shooting area and you pass it. What's the trade-off to making that pass versus taking that shot? That expected goal could have been high. And obviously it's not apples to apples, because anytime you pass, we're probably measuring, like, it's going to be biased high. There's probably some latent information we don't have in there, but we're able to think about it. This is kind of the log-loss comparison, and kind of just going through down the line. The improvement from adding goaltender positioning is about the same as adding the tracking features to the event expected goal model. So we're headed the right direction. We haven't split the atom, but it's kind of moving the right way. So we have about 7 minutes left. Yeah? Oh, all right. It's all about timing, right? So just kind of go through and just to preface, like, these are demonstrative examples, like, most of the goals, like, this isn't necessarily, there's not a huge difference in each of the shots in the data set, but these are examples where it really came to be different. So you can see the Dubois pass here. So like I said, I'm scoring all pass events and shot events. You could probably see that, like, the event tracking expected goal is about 8%. You could argue that's a little high, especially if you had something like body position. You can kind of see maybe his hands are a little further back. Maybe the goalie doesn't have to, like, honor the shot as much. But you can see the Dubois pass. Actually, once we know the goaltender positioning, it goes up to about 10%, which is actually somewhat significant. And you can kind of see why. I mean, before the pass is made, Georgiev here is in his butterfly on the goal line, which, is not ideal. And by the time the pass makes it over to Atkinson, I use my play-by-play expected goal model as kind of a 14%. The tracking expected goal model has it at 31%. But once you tell the model, like, Georgiev's on the other side of the net, that jumps to 83. With the expected, like, if you would have played that right and got a decent push across, it still would have been very high, but it would have. Georgiev here is probably costing himself, a fifth of the goal just by, kind of playing this wrong, frankly. No fault of his own, but he made the wrong decision. This is another application, right? So, and again, this kind of goes back to the idea of, there's some latent information in the body pose. Marchand actually passes out of you can see Mrazek doesn't make it all the way over. Marchand actually passes out of a very good shooting situation. Again, stick a little behind him, and that's something body pose would probably handle a little bit more. And then the Bergeron shot has a nice little jump as well. Once we know, like, Mrazek's moving all over and doesn't quite get there in time. And this is kind of flip side. This is like, hey, this is Carter Hart kind of shutting down what would be a very good chance by the event tracking expected goal, 30%. But once we know he's able to get it there, the net in front of you is a lot smaller than the net behind you. Shuts down the lane. It's, more modest, 17% for observed. So this is a case where his positioning's helping himself, right? So you can begin to adjust for that. And that flows next into the application. So that's kind of how, again, I don't get to spend as much time as I want on this, but we have a currency to talk about, what did Carter Hart just do there? Well, he, saved himself. He made his life easier, and we can attribute that to him. And so if you look in the appendix, some of the work we do is say, hey, based on how you're helping yourself with expected goals, correlate that with results. There's about 20% of the variation we see in goaltender save percentage matches up with their goaltending position or their positioning adjustment, which, so I mean, that's when you think of kind of what goes into the goaltender results, it's probably like a lot of luck, some positioning, and then some save selection. So that works, right? Especially considering this isn't a full body pose model sort of thing. You can do the same thing for shooters. Are you shooting into the goalie's chest, or on a good chance, right? Like, are you being selective with your shots? Are you shooting when the goalie's out of position? And there's, if you're getting the goalie out of position when you shoot, you're going to have better results. Same with the passer. You look for passer perspective. Are you able to create goaltender movement for the shooter receiving the shot, right? That's a huge skill. Shooter propensity relative to expected, kind of get a shooting profile. And what kind of chances are you passing versus what are you shooting? Again, those two, the shot and pass expected goals models aren't apples to apples, but measured against, at the player level. We actually might have time to go through some of the stuff in the appendix quickly. And same thing with goaltender passing. I mean, looking at the kind of how you could vary shot or shooting percentage based on shot selection for players, something less happens for goalies where, if you play something perfectly, the shooter might not even shoot, right? They got to carry the puck And that's a win, but that's not something we'd ever see in the data, right? So just in sum, we do have this depth angle trade-off. We were able to identify goaltender strategic decisions. They're fairly stable, which is, if we have one sample of data, we can probably infer over the next sample of data. We have some goaltender positioning explains about 20% of their save percentage, and shot selections for shooter can vary it up to their shooting percentage up to 2.5%. And the expected goals, we see a nice little gain, and we can use this as a framework for shooters and goalies, figure out how their positioning and conversely their shot selection is impacts their expected goal probability. And so next steps would be something a little bit. What I did was this composite pass threats, things like this, shooting lanes, kind of rules-based stuff, working off of what David did, expected pass, expected reception, this kind of multiplicative chain of events. And, I just did shots and passes, but obviously attackers can carry the puck as well. And that would be a little bit more, a lot more complicated. But you can kind of think of it that way. And then the kind of body position, there's a lot of latent shooter information, kind of like we saw in the Marchand example, and a friendly Marchand example finally. And then the goaltender position, we just there's just a stick on the ice with the XY coordinate. I mean, there's more to the we want squareness, we want that sort of thing. So that's all I got. Thank you. Oh, and make sure if you want, there's stuff in the appendix. I'm sure nobody wants to go over this right now. Thanks.